what is stated. Is that chapter 12? Yeah, the guys in the back have chapter 12. If you don't have, you can raise your hand and they will pass that out to you. So if you need that, you can raise your hand. All right. So, at the beginning of chapter 12, what is stated that alerts us or makes known to us that it's kind of a new section, a new thing is beginning. Now concerning, right? And he's done this in some of the previous chapters or some of the previous points that he's made. Now concerning, answering some questions that had been asked of him in this section, and really this goes all the way through chapter 14, chapter 14, so it continues on. This topic, this idea, him dealing with this goes through chapter 14. What is it that he's dealing with? Spiritual gifts. All right, so last time that we met on Wednesday, Jeremiah taught 1 through 14 and pointed out some various things. And we need to understand what was going on to understand the body and everything else that Paul brings out here in this back half. Okay? So what are just some things that were pointed out there in 1 through 14? Obviously, he's talking about and answering some questions on spiritual gifts. But what are some of the things that Paul points out about them? Okay, very good. Same origin and purpose. Is that what you're... Okay, very good. To edify the church. They had the same purpose. They had the same origin. So the origin being from who? Okay, and that's important. The origin being for God, and the purpose was to edify. Because what does it appear, and we're really going to see it as we get into this back half, that Paul's having to deal with regarding spiritual gifts? Okay, so they have spiritual gifts. Here's who gave it to you. Here's the purpose. Why is he having to lay that out in the first part? It seems like there are those that are boasting about the gift that they would have, right? And so it goes back to that point. It's important to understand who gave this to you. God. You didn't, and I'm kind of stepping on some of the things that I'm going to be hitting on, but I want us to understand that was one of the things that was laid out. It has the same origin. It comes from God. It has the same purpose, to edify the saints. And the reason we're going to see that is important, we're going to see as we keep going throughout this lesson. In other words, the gifts all came from God, so don't get to thinking too high or too low of yourself. I want to point that out today. We're going to see both sides of it. No doubt there could be those that have this gift and think that they're better than everybody else and look down on their gifts because of the gift that they have. There might be those who don't have this gift over here, and they think too low of themselves that I serve no purpose at all then, and therefore I'm not going to do anything with it. Well, that's equally as big of a problem, because all of these gifts work together, as we're going to say, for the purpose of edification, right? And if you have one doing this over here and this one over here decides I don't want to do it because I feel like it's not a very important gift, you have a hole, right? You have a problem, and the body's not functioning as it should be, which is what we are going to be getting in here. Getting to in here. One of the things that he points out at the very end in verses 12 through 14 is that, and this is really verse 14, for in fact the body is not one member but many. And that kind of gets us right here to where we are in verse 15 as we're going to go on. So you have these spiritual gifts. They have been distributed, if you will, amongst the people who distributed them. It isn't the people themselves. It was God. This is the origin is God. Not only did they come from God, but God's the one that distributed them. And you need to understand that as we go throughout, because we're all a body. Now, this gets us here. And I know I stepped on a little bit of what I'm going to say, but kind of gets us here to verse 15, going through the end of the chapter. He starts off in verses 15 and really even in 16, and he points something out about the body. Okay, so he ends there in verse 14 by saying that for in fact the body is not one member but many. So there are many members that make up this body. Which, by the way, what body is he talking about? Okay, very good. Right now he's going to make the allusion to an actual human body here, right, and these different things that we understand. But this church is a body, and we understand that all have different functions, all have different things that are going on working towards that one purpose, that one goal, right? And so we see that and we understand that. Verse 15, he says something about the foot. What does he say about the foot in verse 15? Say that again. Okay, very good. So if you're a foot, using this as an example here, if you're a foot and you say, well, I'm not a hand, does that mean that you're not part of the body? No. And that's his point, right? If you're a foot and you say, well, I'm not a hand, so I'm not a part of the body. No, that's not true, because a foot and hand both make up what? The body. They're both parts of that body. What does he say in verse 16? Gives another illustration of this. Not with foot and hand, gives a different one. What does he say? Okay, very good. Hey, just because the ear says, well, I'm not of the eye, that means I'm different. I'm not a part of the body. And he says these things, and his point is that true? No, it's not, right? We have these different members that make up the body. And he really hits at this whenever he gets down into when he gets into verse 17, okay? Because in verse 17, sorry, I'm trying to pick up where I am. He says, if the whole body were an eye, where would the hearing? If the whole were hearing, where would the smelling be? Okay? So, I've kind of hit on this, but what's his point that he's starting to build? You need them all, right? And just because you have this individual part over here, and it's not the same as this individual part over here, they have different functions, they have different uses, does that mean that they're not a part of the body? No, one is a hand and one is a foot, but all are part of what? That body. And, importantly, is all needed. Absolutely. Okay? Because, as he continues on in, he I'm trying to keep up with my notes here, where he's going to state this but he's going to point out the fact that, this is verse 19. If they were all one member, where would the body be? In other words, if all were a hand, if all were a foot, if all were an eye or an ear or whatever, would you have the body? No, you wouldn't. Okay? So he points that out there in verse 19. If all were one member, then there would be no body, but that one member, meaning what would the body be? No longer a body, but whatever that one member is. Okay? But in verse 18, he points something out very important. And I hit on this earlier, but I'm coming back to it right here because it's pointed out here in verse 18. Right? So you have the hand, you have the foot, you have the ear, you have all these different parts of the body. Right? They're all a part of the body. They're not separate and apart from one another. And who put each member in its place? God did. Okay, so God put each member in its place just as He pleases. The idea there is just as He wills, right? This is what God's will is. This was how He put it there for the benefit of the body. So we can't be getting to thinking too high or too low of ourselves as a result of that. Okay, gets down into verse 20. There are many members, yet one body. Okay. So verse 20, there are many members, yet one body. And the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. Okay? So we see that being pointed out here. You, just because you are a hand, you can't now look at the foot and say, well, I don't need you, right? Or vice versa. He says in particular here, in verse 21, the eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor the head to the feet. In other words, everyone needs the body. We can't be getting too high or too low on ourselves in the gifts that have been distributed. Now he gets down into verse 22. No, much rather those members of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary. And I really lumped this together, 22 through verse 24. Okay? No, much rather those of the body which seem to be weaker are necessary, and those members of the body which we think to be less honorable, on these we bestow a greater honor, and our unpresentable parts have greater modesty. But our presentable parts have no need, but God composed the body, having given greater honor to the part which lacks. So once again, we see there at the end that God made this body. Now, the New King James, the different words that are used there are weaker, less honorable, and unpresentable. Okay? What is the point that he is making with these? Yeah, these weaker. These we might deem to be weaker, but they are necessary. We have those that we think are less honorable, but we bestow a greater honor, or those that are unpresentable, right? But we have a greater modesty, right? What is his point with that? I mean, to this point, it's made sense. Hand, the foot, the eye, all these types of things. What about this section right here? I definitely think that that's a part of this, right? Especially whenever you look at that idea of being weaker, more feeble. You have those parts that are there. And whenever I looked up Arndt Gingrich's definition of that word weaker, it says to suffer from debilitating illnesses. What parts of our body often suffer from debilitating illnesses? Say that. Yeah, the inside parts, right? Like hearts or lungs, right, or intestines or whatever, right? I mean, so we're thinking about those things, and sometimes we might get to think, man, okay, they're there, but I mean, all they do is cause me problems, right? Because, I mean, I'm sick and I'm ill as a result of them, or those different types of things. But what's pointed out here is, what are they? They're absolutely necessary. That's right, Leslie. You have to have them to live, okay? So, in other words, you start thinking about the body, and you got different members of different parts of the bodies, and one over here saying, well, I'm a hand, I'm doing this, right? I'm doing this work, or I'm a foot, I don't know, right? You can see what I'm doing. You got the inner parts of the body, and it might be like, well, I mean, you know, is it really of a benefit? Absolutely. It's not only a benefit, they are absolutely necessary to the functioning of the body, okay? So I believe that that's one part of it. Anybody got anything else kind of on that or on this section? So we might have these parts of the body that we view as, you know, in that idea of unpresentable, definitely a part that needs or we would be covering, right? Some of these we start to think about that they have no purpose, that they really don't serve much to any good, but they are completely necessary. They are completely needed. And if we don't have them, then the body doesn't function as it should. He goes on to say, but the presentable parts have no need for covering. Why would the presentable parts not have a need for covering? They're presentable, right? Who wants to cover up the presentable parts, right? They're presentable. And so, in effect, we think, okay, well, we don't need a covering, and they are those that are going to go out and go do all this and that. And sometimes we think that that is like the greatest part of the body, if you will. But in reality, these other pieces make up the whole. And if you look down on them or whatever, if they aren't there, they are absolutely necessary for the body to function. And as I said, he comes back to this idea that God composed the body. He put each in that place. He goes on to say the reason for this. God composed the body so that there would be what? Verse 25. Yeah, that there would be no division, right? God composed the body in this way, not so there would be divisions of these different parts or anything like that, but that each part works together for the benefit of the whole, and that there would be no schism in the body. And one of the things that he points out for it is, or one of the things that he points out is that not only so there won't be any schism or division, but what other reason did God compose the body in this way? Why can't there be a schism or division? Thanks, Bill. DJ? I thought you were saying something. If you weren't, I didn't mean to put you on the spots. That's right. That's right. If the body is divided against itself, it won't survive. If the hand's trying to fight with the foot, that ain't going to work, right? The hand's trying to do this and the foot's trying to do this over here. I mean, it's got to be in unison. It's got to be together. It's all got to be working towards the same end. And so he says, everything was put in this way so there won't be division because each part relies on each part. Does that make sense? That makes sense. Each part relies on each part. In other words, if we have no feet, the hands aren't going to be as effective as they would be. And I know I keep using that as an example, but we get the point of what's being said here. Okay? All of this is to work together. He goes on to say what? That we are to have the same care for one another. Why are we to have the same care for one another? And that idea of care, real quickly, is to be anxious about, to take thought in. We're thinking about one another in this way. Why do we have care for one another? Because if one suffer, all suffers. That's right. He continues on and says that in verse 26. If one part of the body suffers, we all suffer. If one part of the body is honored, all will rejoice. Right? I'm sitting here thinking about a body, and not to bring another illustration into it just for the sake of it, but my mind obviously goes with football, and I think we can all understand it from a scheme sense. Right? If the linemen don't do their job, can the quarterback be as effective? No, and that's really the point. If one part of the body isn't doing their job, or if one part of the body is sick or ill or down or not doing it, it affects the entire body. But then again, if the linemen do their job in football, what can the quarterback be? More successful. If the body's all functioning as it should be, it's going to be more successful, right? Therefore, everybody's doing their job, everybody's coming together, working as it should, to the benefit of the body. And that's one of the things that we need to understand when we make the application to us. I know it's here in spiritual gifts, and we'll get to some of the application of the spiritual gifts here in a minute, and certainly whenever we get over to chapter 14. But as we look to make application to us, Jeremiah laid out last time, spiritual gifts, are they with us today? Do we have them like we see in New Testament? No, we don't, right? We don't have spiritual gifts. They serve their purpose. Their purpose came to a completion. Okay? But we make that application for us today. Everybody has their different aspects, their different talents, their different abilities. Not everybody is the preacher or the evangelist. Okay? But does that mean that they are not important? Absolutely not. In fact, the preacher or evangelist is only going to be as effective in the local work as that local work will help him to be. Local work can do a whole lot to make him not effective, meaning the members can do a whole lot to make that evangelist not effective. Okay? And so we see those types of things, and we recognize this, and we need to take and make application of that. And I've been hitting on this, but I want to stop right now and make sure that I'm clear on my 2 points of application that I want to make from this section. Because there's both sides of this. I think a lot of times whenever we read through this, at least me, I look at it as, and a lot of times what I had always taken away from it is, well, don't get too high on your abilities, right? Right here for these in particular. Don't get too high on that spiritual gift that you were given. And that is certainly true and certainly an application. But sometimes I leave it there, right? Don't be too prideful with what God has blessed you with and start thinking little of everyone else. Okay? We obviously see the problems with that, and we talk about that all the time. Okay? But the other side of that as well. So we need to make sure we're not too prideful, thinking little of everybody else, because we actually need the whole to work together to benefit the entire body. But what about that other side? Maybe thinking too low, or thinking, in this case, the gift that I was given is insignificant to the gift that so-and-so was given. What is the problem with that? What happens whenever you go down that path? And I believe it's pointed out, at least implied here. Very good. These gifts, going back to what we talked about, who distributed them? God did, right? So it's self-centered. Why didn't I get what so-and-so has? And God, what are you doing giving me this lowly gift? Right? This, what I perceive as a lowly ability. You can get going down that path. What happens when you go down that path? You're focusing on yourself. David? That's right.
engaged role in comparing ourselves to others instead of comparing ourselves to Christ, and are we doing our full job that we can do?
Yeah.
For our full ability. And then we start comparing ourselves to others, and we think ourselves, well, it's not worthy. Well, it don't matter if I do my job. But it does. And when you don't do your job, your team fails.
Yeah.
When you don't do your job here, that shows.
That's right. And that's, I mean, that's really hitting at what I was getting at. I know I was kind of asking kind of a specific, or looking for a specific answer, if you will, but that's exactly what I was looking for. So we're certainly going to be those who, it's self-centered. We start looking around and we start, questioning God. Why don't I have that ability? Why don't I have that going on? And a lot of times what ends up happening is we get bitter and we shut down and then we don't do anything. We don't utilize the abilities that we have or do the things that we can do. And as a result of that, we hinder the work of the body. Going back to some of the example, if the hand over here is like, you know what, I'm not a foot, or vice versa, whatever, and you know what, because of that, I'm not a part of the body, I'm just going to do my own thing. In fact, whenever I'm going to do my own thing, I'm just not going to do anything. I'm just going to go limp. Is there a problem with that? Absolutely, it's going to cause a big problem. And so we need to understand and recognize that. Steve?
Thinking about the team members working together in comparison with our body, I think the easiest example for me is cancer. It is part of your body. It's when cells start abnormally reproducing and starts destroying other tissue. And that's exactly what we don't want in the church, a cancer, or in your own body, a cancer. And that's why he deals with this in chapter 5, and it needs to be cut out and taken away so that it doesn't destroy the whole body.
Yeah.
And that's the best example I can think of a body part going awry.
That's a really good point, and oftentimes we'll refer to that, right? Maybe some things, we think about it in the workplace, that individual's a cancer to the workplace, all those types of things. We sometimes can apply it to local work. Man, they're really kind of being a cancer here. Well, there is the sense where they're going out and doing their own thing, and maybe they're a cancer because of their influence with maybe some of the things that they're teaching if they're doctrinally wrong or whatever, maybe the way that they're behaving or acting. There can also be that sense, and here's one of the things I'm wanting to point out. It's not just a matter of only going out and doing your own thing, but getting to the point where you feel like, I'm of no use to the body, so I'm going to do nothing. And then you have that individual, that Christian that just shows up. They sit down in the pew, and maybe they show up all four meeting times, but that's about the extent of what they do. And there is so much more that can be being done. It might not be something that's at the forefront, like at the pulpit or teaching class or any of those kinds of things. I think we all can think of an example of individuals who are humble. They, from the standpoint of they keep to themselves, are kind of quiet. You really don't get a whole lot out of them from, like me, I like to talk, so I go around and talk and visit and, sometimes don't stop talking. I'm always getting the lights flicked on me, not just for Bible class, talking about when it's time to leave the building and then being asked if I'll lock it up. You don't have people that are all of that nature, but I'm telling you, you have those that might not be like that. They understand their impact and they write notes and they write cards. And maybe it's an old school thing now and it doesn't happen as much anymore, but I'm telling you, I'm a millennial, but whenever I get that, it is so meaningful to me. A text message is meaningful too. But for some reason, when somebody takes the time to sit down with a pen and a card and write a note and then give it to me, how meaningful that is. I'm thinking back whenever I was preaching full-time here, and I would get notes from time to time from y'all. What that meant and how big of an impact that is. You have a function and a role to play, and don't ever discount and discredit thinking because I'm not doing this, it's useless, it's meaningless. Kirk?
Well, we also have the issue of distraction. A wife who feels unappreciated and less than a husband is a distraction to the relationship. Members who are a constant issue are a distraction to the focus of the congregation and the work that the elders have to do. We have examples of like the brother of the prodigal son. You know, the father is throwing a feast that the son is back, and the brother over here is causing a problem. He's got to take the focus away, and you know, poor me, why didn't I get treated well? So it seems to me like the best situation that we have in the scriptures is the 2-talent man. We didn't complain that he didn't get 5 talents. And he wasn't like the 1-talent man who just did nothing. He took what was given to him, and the master had 4 talents when he was done.
That's right. And all work together towards that end. And it again goes back to this point, who, especially here as we're applying it to spiritual gifts, who distributed these, right? To you brethren that are having this problem and looking at these gifts over here as greater than these, right? Who gave it to you? God gave it to you. Take it and use it to the best of your ability. Right? Jason?
I think also we have to be careful not to limit our potential when we read this passage and lock yourself in to a certain comfort zone and say, well, you know, I just really makes me nervous to do this, or I just don't think I can do that. Well, you might need to. You might need to stand up and do that at some point in time. And, you know, your potential may make you or allow you to improve in some of those areas. We want to be careful not to just make that identification yourself and say, this is my spot. I'm not going to go outside of that.
Certainly we need to be those who grow and do everything we can that is given to us, right? I mean, applied to us when we have spiritual gifts, but the abilities that we have, make the most of those abilities for the cause. Lord.
I was just going to say, kind of on another note of that is not to maybe just what you see of people setting and you don't think they're doing anything. We don't know that. And one of my favorite verses is Hebrews 10 and 25. And sometimes people just showing up is an encouragement to others, because we don't really know what they're going through.
Right. Yeah, certainly you think about the application of what he's saying there is you have these various members that you think are insignificant and have no purpose, but they have that purpose. And it's for the betterment of the whole. And we need to recognize that, and we need to understand that and make sure that we make that application. Scott?
If you want to live a miserable life, compare yourself to others all the time. And you'll be miserable. You know, concern yourself with others and help others and be grateful for them in what they do. And yes, if you're a hand, you might need to stretch yourself into being a foot or whatever and do other things. But, you know, compare yourself to others and you'll be miserable.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that that's one of the points, again, with what you have been given, right? The abilities that you have been given here, certainly the application is to spiritual gifts, and I don't want to take it too far off of that. You've been given the spiritual gift. Use it to the best that you can, right? Us, we've been given, obviously, certain talents, certain abilities, right? Make the most of those that you can. Do what you can with those to the benefit of the Lord. And if your mindset is doing whatever I can that God has given me to the benefit of the cause, to the benefit of the body, whenever I do that, that's whenever my mind's going to be in the right place. I'm not going to be comparing myself to others. I'm going to be comparing myself really to me from the standpoint of, I have this, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'm going to do what I can. Go ahead.
Kind of parallel, or what makes me think of is Philippians chapter 2, verses 1 through 4. Basically saying, let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but lowliness of mind. Let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. It kind of goes along with this. That's your purpose, is to look out for each other. Don't think of yourself or others. Better think
Certainly. Think of others better than yourself. And I believe, again, one of the main points of this is you have this, and all have been given this by God, right? These spiritual gifts in particular by God. It's for the betterment of the body, not for the betterment of you yourself, not to elevate you yourself and put others down or whatever. It's to benefit the body. I know I only have a few more minutes, but he wraps up in 27 through 31, talking about making this application back to the spiritual gifts that are there. The body of Christ. We're all, meaning those who are in the body of Christ, or of that body of Christ. Those who have been baptized and have put themselves in the body are members individually. We all have these different talents and these abilities that need to come together. And God has appointed these in the church. He goes through and lists out apostles, prophets, teachers, miracles, gifts of healings, helps, administrations, varieties of tongues. And then he goes on in verse 29, are all apostles, are all prophets, are all teachers, are all workers of miracles? Do all have these, the gifts of healings? Do all speak with tongues? Do all interpret? Do all work, or all the exact same? No, we all have different ones, and not all have all these gifts either. We all work together, and it's for the benefit of the body. He concludes, earnestly desire the best gifts, and yet I show you a more excellent way. That is going to be dealt with in chapter 13, right? We have these gifts that have been given, but when we get to the end of chapter 13, what do we know is going to happen to those gifts? Eventually. They're going to go away, right? What's the more excellent way? These gifts that have been given you, these spiritual gifts given to you by God? No. Because does the gift itself mean that you're a great Christian? What is? Growing, right? And working towards, you need to put on and you need to be one who loves, and that's going to be dealt with next time. All right, like I said, chapter 13 is up here. I appreciate the comments in class. We will go through this, not Wednesday, but Sunday. We'll be going through chapter 13. Thank you. For my sake.